All right, welcome everyone to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into a specific, quite critical take on Nigerian governance under the current administration.
That's right. We're working from excerpts of a source called Renewed Hopelessness, a critique of Nigerian governance. And it seems to lean heavily on points made by Sowore on Channels TV.
Exactly. And our mission here, just to be clear, is to unpack what this source is arguing. We're looking at its specific claims, its viewpoint.
Yeah, we want to help you understand the picture this particular document paints. It's really important, like you said, that we're presenting the content of the source itself, impartially exploring its perspective.
Absolutely. So think of it as us navigating this specific text together. And right off the bat, the core argument is, well, it's pretty provocative. It goes straight for the idea of hope.
It really does. The central claim, the one that jumps out, is basically, the more you hope with the Bola Ahmed Tinubu regime, the more you lose.
Wow. Okay, that's quite a statement. So the source takes that whole renewed hope theme and just flips it, arguing people are actually facing renewed hopelessness.
Yeah, and it lays out this really stark choice, doesn't it?
It does. It basically says you either keep suffering or you need to bond together and bundle them out.
Which, sets a very critical, almost confrontational tone for everything else in the document.
And a lot of that follows through in the economic arguments, right? Claims about hardship, mismanagement.
Definitely. The source gets into claims about economic decline, lack of productivity. There's that really striking comparison it makes about the minimum wage.
Oh, right. The one saying the minimum wage back in, was it 75?
1975, yeah. According to the source, its value was supposedly better than the one for, well, presumably now or looking towards 2025. It's a way the source frames this perceived decline.
That's a strong claim. And there's also this accusation of manipulation, especially about past achievements.
Yes, the source challenges the idea that the current leader built Lagos before coming to, as the source puts it, ruin Nigeria.
And the counterclaim in the source is
that they never built Lagos in the first place, but were more focused on, manipulation and collecting taxes there. That's the assertion in this document.
Okay. And this sort of feeds into the broader picture. The source paints of poverty.
Yeah, it describes it not just as poverty, but multidimensional poverty. The implication being it's widespread, affecting more than just income, maybe basic services, opportunities too.
The source seems to argue that, well, if the government was doing a good job,
right, if they were doing anything genuinely effective,
then they'd naturally have the country's support.
Yeah.
But the claim here is they're simply not doing well and not doing anything.
And this criticism extends to specific things like student loans.
What's the take there?
The source calls it a calculated idea, basically arguing the government is asking people to take loans for school.
Okay.
When, according to the source, those people are not going to find jobs when they leave the university.
That's a pretty cynical interpretation from the source's perspective.
Okay.
And it contrasts that with another claim, doesn't it, about money going elsewhere?
Yeah. It does. The source claims the government is stabilizing the people who do nothing in the country with a huge amount of money.
Then it gives a number.
Yeah. The document specifically mentions 250 billion naira for this alleged purpose.
Interesting. Now, the source also offers an explanation for inflation. What's the argument there?
Well, it's quite specific. It claims the main driver isn't, maybe typical economic factors, but that the moment you bring the allocation on a monthly basis, they go and change it to dollar.
So the source is pointing to currency speculation by officials.
That seems to be the core argument. It claims nobody is productive. Here they are buying and selling Forex. Governors, everybody's doing it. That's the problem.
Okay, so the source paints a picture of an economy driven by speculation, not production, leading to instability.
Exactly. That's the perspective offered in this document, and it uses some specific numbers to back this up.
Like the exchange rate?
Yeah, it notes the naira allegedly went from 460 to 1650 today. That's the figure given.
And what about salaries? How does it illustrate the impact on people?
It argues that a salary of, say, 15,000 naira in the past had more actual buying power than even 70,000 naira today. Again, these are examples the source uses to really underline its claims about falling living standards.
Okay, so moving on from the purely economic points, the source also hits hard on security and just general government effectiveness.
Yes, it makes a very strong claim regarding the security leadership. The source alleges that the chief of defense staff, or maybe chief of army staff, essentially told Nigerians that they're helpless and is actually asking Nigerians to please help them defend Boko Haram.
And the source has an opinion on that request.
It does. It asserts that sort of plea should not be coming from the army, that should be coming from vigilantes.
So what's the implication there, according to the source, about the state of the official forces?
Well, from the source's viewpoint, it suggests a fundamental failure, implying the army isn't capable of handling threats like Boko Haram anymore, pushing that responsibility onto citizens.
The document also mentions geography, doesn't it, about Boko Haram's reach?
It does. It claims Boko Haram, which the source says the leader met in Borno State, has now spread and is already in Kogi State. That's presented as evidence by the source of the security situation actually getting worse and expanding.
And it's not just security. The source goes after infrastructure claims, too.
Right. It disputes government assertions about building 700 kilometers of roads. The source claims the reality is more like only 30 kilometers.
And it offers a specific example for that.
Yeah, it includes this detail where the source claims they called Ondo State to check on the plans for this road construction. And supposedly Ondo State said they don't have it because they never planned to construct any 700-kilometer road. It's presented as a very direct challenge to official claims.
Okay. So these points on security and infrastructure, the source uses them to build its argument about a wider failure in governance.
Exactly, suggesting, a gap between what's being claimed by the government and the reality people are experiencing, according to this critique.
Now, a really significant part of this source seems to be its critique of the political class itself, and specifically this whole idea of politicians' experience.
Yes, the source is deeply skeptical about that. It even draws a parallel to the previous leadership.
How so?
It states the same thing they said about Buhari that has been preparing since 1978.
Okay.
When he came back here in 2015, you know what he did to Nigeria? He killed Nigeria, and now they are preparing Nigeria for burial. That's the historical comparison the source makes.
Wow, that is incredibly harsh framing from the source. And it offers its own definition of experience.
It does. It argues, quote, "The experience we should look at is the experience that we've had with them, not the experience of how long they've been screwing the country."
So completely flips the usual meaning. It's about the impact they've had, not just tenure, from this critical viewpoint.
Precisely. And based on that perspective, the source issues a pretty stark warning.
What does it say?
It says, "No matter how much we get airtime, we will warn you. The earlier you get to know what is happening to you and rejected it, the earlier you fight back, the better for you."
That's quite direct.
And it doesn't stop there. It flat out calls the current government a government of liars.
And looking ahead, the source's prediction is
very bleak. It predicts doom if things continue on the current path. We are heading for doom if we continue with the trajectory that we are getting now.
Does it give a time frame?
It's quite definitive about the near term. It claims in the next 2 years, they are not going to do anything.
Really?
Yeah, and it argues that essentially nothing to look forward to. Anything that is going to happen to you in the next 2 years has already happened to you in the last 2 years. The source seems convinced the negative trends are set.
The source also mentions political coalitions, doesn't it? What's the view there?
Quite cynical. It sees them as basically either trying to get attention for those who don't have job or those who feel like they need relevance. And the source explicitly says it won't be part of that.
So a rejection of the established political maneuvering.
Seems so. It extends to the whole system, really. The source claims politicians are all the same people, just changing the uniform and changing the parties overnight.
And it uses an anecdote to illustrate this. About Amechi.
Right. The source mentions Amechi, claiming he's been in power since 1999, but is complaining about hunger.
And there's that quote.
Yeah. "If I are not hungry, me, I am hungry."
The source seems to use this story to highlight, well, maybe a disconnect, or perhaps just how pervasive the problems are, even affecting the long-serving elite, in its view.
There's another anecdote mentioned, too, about a party.
Oh, yeah, the source talks about a birthday party where you rented the hall, had a performer who probably collected 10 millionaire to perform for an hour.
And the source includes that, presumably to contrast with the hardship it describes.
That seems to be the likely intent, yes. Highlighting what it portrays as misplaced priorities or excessive spending versus the economic struggles faced by many, according to the document. Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, we've really focused on pulling out the key arguments and the main claims from the specific source, renewed hopelessness.
Yeah, we've looked at its central idea that renewed hope is actually renewed hopelessness. We've covered its economic critiques, wages, forex, student loans, alleged mismanagement.
Right, and the security points, the infrastructure disputes.
And of course, that strong stance on political leadership, the source's unusual definition of experience, and its generally pessimistic view of where things are headed.
And just to reiterate for everyone listening, we've presented the points as they appear in this document. This is one specific critical perspective.
Exactly. It's one viewpoint laid out in the source for you to consider. And maybe think about that challenge it poses to the idea of political experience. What does the source really mean when it tells you to look at the experience we've had with them, not just how long they've been in office?
Or consider that stark choice the source puts forward. Keep suffering or bond together and bundle them out. Given everything else the source argues about renewed hopelessness and heading for doom.
Yeah, what does that imply from the source's perspective about the necessity, or maybe the reality, of having to choose between just those two paths? Something to think about.